Meeting the love of their life, eloping, and getting married is something that most teenage girls dream of. Caroline Crouch was no different. A young girl in high school, only 15 years old, was flattered by a financially well-off 27-year-old pilot who flew his helicopter over her school, winning her heart. The two eloped and got married, but what seemed like the perfect fairy tale love story would soon turn into a murder that fooled the world. On Tuesday, May 11th, 2021, at 4:30 a.m., a man named Charalambos Anagnostopoulos, also known as Babis, was horrifically awakened from his bed. At the time of the incident, he had rented a 2-story maisonette in the suburbs of Glikonera, an area located on the outskirts of Athens, Greece. Babis did not have much time to retaliate as 3 men, concealing their identities with hoods, scuffled and overpowered him. They were armed with pistols and wasted no time tying up Babis before blindfolding him with duct tape. He could not do much as the intruders then went after his wife, a 19-year-old girl named Caroline Crouch. The entire incident woke up their 11-month-old daughter, who was sleeping nearby. The intruders, who spoke with Greek and Albanian accents, repeatedly asked where the money was. Caroline did not know that what appeared to be a robbery would turn into her own murder. Caroline Crouch was born to retired engineer David Crouch and Susan de la Costa on July 12, 2001, in Athens. When she was just 8 years old, the family relocated to the island of Alonissos, the place where she grew up. They moved because both David and Susan had fallen in love with the coastal surroundings. From a very young age, Caroline embraced her beachside life. She was passionate about both scuba diving and swimming. She met her future husband, Babis, during a Good Friday parade in 2017. At the time, Babis was a commercial helicopter pilot, and Caroline was only 15 years old. 3 years later, they got married in Portugal on July 15, 2019. A few days prior to her murder, Babis and Caroline had purchased a plot of land. They planned to build their dream house on the land for themselves and their infant daughter. To facilitate purchasing the land, Caroline had received 50,000 euros as a gift from her parents. As for the construction costs, the couple had around 10,000 euros hidden away in their house. The public in Greece at the time did not rely much on banks, as they were at continuous risk of facing bankruptcy. In light of such circumstances, it was common for the general public to have cash stashed away in their houses, as it was deemed a safer option. Caroline probably had a similar perspective on storing cash and, by no means, would have anticipated what would happen on May 11th. A cry for help. Both Babis and Caroline, alongside their daughter, were tormented with fear as the intruders demanded more. In an attempt to end the nightmare that had befallen them, Babis told them exactly where the money was hidden, in a location that was rather unconventional. The intruders opened the Monopoly board game box and took all the money Babis and Caroline had stashed away for their dream house. However, they did not leave. Instead, they continued to roam from room to room, snatching jewelry and other valuable items. The looters wanted more, but Babis and Caroline had given them everything. In desperation and fear, they begged for their lives and that of their daughter. Babis could hear the screams of his wife as the intruders held a firearm against their 11-month-old infant. Although blindfolded, he fought continuously against the restraints. However, the rope around his neck was tightened to the extent that he kept fainting in and out of consciousness. He eventually lost consciousness, only to regain his senses after a while. Once awake, he discovered that the men had left the house. The only thing he could hear was the painful cries of his infant daughter. After about 30 minutes, Babis was able to get close to his mobile phone and dial emergency services using his nose. As soon as the call connected, Babis cried out for help, asking emergency services to send an ambulance and providing them with his location. Given that he had duct tape around his mouth, the entire call was filled with muffled words. The operator on the other end asked Babis to explain what had happened, but all he could manage to say was, "Robbers came in." An hour and a half had gone by since the intruders had broken into Babby's and Caroline's residence. First responders arrived at the scene around 6 a.m. As they raced up the front steps to enter the house, what they saw can only be defined as horrific. Inside, the living space and kitchen had been completely ransacked. Drawers were left open and empty, with clothing and other belongings scattered across the entire space. Among the debris was an open Monopoly box, the same box in which Babys and Caroline had hidden the money. First responders also found a security camera on the living room couch. It appeared as if it had been ripped off the walls. While the camera was lying on the couch, its memory card was missing. From the staircase hung the corpse of a white and brown husky puppy who had been strangled with her own leash. Babys was found on the floor of the main bedroom. His eyes and mouth were covered in duct tape that reached his neck, and restraints kept his hands and feet behind his back. On the bed, lying face down, was Caroline Crouch. Their infant daughter was beside her, crying and clapping as she pushed her mother in an attempt to wake her up. Caroline was declared dead. Their daughter, while in evident distress, appeared to be unharmed. First responders, however, were quick to observe Caroline's pale skin and determined that she was murdered. Babys went into visible shock when he was freed from his restraints and saw the corpse of his wife, the woman he had been in love with for the past 5 years. The officers were quick to ensure the safety of the infant and began to interrogate Babys. Based on his side of the story and the state of the crime scene, the presence of 4 men was determined. Police officers concluded that 3 men had entered the house while the 4th kept watch. They interpreted the entire sequence of events up to the murder and escape as follows. The intruders approached the house through a dirt road that led to its rear entrance. They failed to break in through the rear door and then removed security pins off a basement window to enter the house. After entering the maisonette, they murdered Roxy, the family's 7-month-old husky. The murder weapon was her own leash. The 3 men then entered the main bedroom where Babys and Caroline were asleep. They damaged the house and took the money out of the Monopoly box. Before leaving, they murdered Caroline by smothering her with a pillow. Since Babys was drifting in and out of consciousness, the intruders may have assumed he had died and left, believing that they had left no witnesses behind. As far as Caroline's death was concerned, it was revealed that it was not an instant experience. The 20-year-old female suffered an attack that lasted for around 6 minutes. Bruises across her body showed signs of retaliation, and those on her lips and tongue hinted at the possibility of sharp objects being used. No signs of sexual assault were found. Investigation and speculation. Although the damage done to the couple's house was immense, no concrete evidence was left behind by the intruders. The only thing that emergency first responders found in the house was the hood of one of the intruders. Based on how Babys had described the event, it was concluded that the hood must have fallen while Babys was retaliating. This may have been a small piece of evidence for a case of such magnitude, but the hood falling off was enough for Babys to get a glimpse of the culprit. A sketch depicting an overweight, dark-skinned, tall individual was created based on the details Babys shared. Despite being disoriented, Babys was able to identify 2 firearms that were used as well. According to him, the intruders had a black pistol and a silver Colt. Details of the investigation revealed that the intruders were able to escape with 10,000 euros in cash and jewelry worth 20,000 euros. In addition, police concluded that this was an act of professional criminals who had observed the family and waited for the right moment to strike. Furthermore, a police spokesperson stated, "It was brutal and violent," and went on to categorize it as an act of someone with a lack of emotions and a strong antisocial personality. Numerous speculations soon followed as details of the investigation provided more and more insight into the murder. A key trail of thought in everyone's mind was that if money was the motive, why was murder necessary? Some other speculations put forth claims such as, the intruders were high on drugs and could not control their actions. Caroline saw or knew them. Caroline resisted and fought back, given that she was a black belt kickboxer, and the intruders had to silence her to keep her under control. Alarms may have been raised as Caroline may have started to scream when her 11-month-old daughter had a gun against her temple. While all of this was mere speculation, the investigators were certain about one thing: the attack was premeditated. The reason for such an assumption was that the intruders knew the couple had money hidden in the house. Based on this assumption, the police questioned Babby's and Caroline's inner circle. They believed that the gang had been given a tip. Alongside these interrogations, security camera footage from homes and businesses in close proximity was also examined. In the footage, the police identified a dark-colored vehicle followed by a motorcycle that was cruising around the couple's house on the morning of the crime. The murder of Caroline Crouch and the pursuit of justice. Caroline Crouch was laid to rest 3 days after her murder. Her final resting place was on the Greek island of Alonissos, the same place where her parents had fallen in love and where she had grown up. At the funeral, her husband, Babis, paid tribute to her, expressing how lucky he felt to have met Caroline, how fortunate he was that she had loved him, and how grateful he was that she was the mother of their daughter. He tearfully acknowledged that their child would grow up without remembering her mother, but promised that Caroline's presence would always be felt through their daughter. While Caroline's funeral was taking place, a car was pulled over in northeastern Greece during a routine stop. Inside was a 36-year-old Georgian national, Georgi Heredisvili, who was on his way to the Bulgarian border. When he handed over his passport, authorities quickly determined it was a fake. Who was this man, and how was he connected to Caroline's murder? A violent criminal with a suspicious past. Investigations revealed that Georgi Heredisvili was a violent criminal with multiple prior convictions. He was wanted for 12 break-ins across Athens over the past 6 months, 3 of which had occurred in Babis and Caroline's neighborhood. One of these break-ins took place in December when Heredisvili and 3 accomplices entered a home through a rear window, eerily similar to what had happened at Caroline and Babis's house. The intruders dragged the female occupant by her hair and threatened to slit her throat before escaping with 10,000 euros in cash and valuable jewelry. Another robbery occurred on March 7th, just 2 months before Caroline's murder. This time, the criminals tied up 4 individuals, including an elderly couple and their cleaning lady, stealing cash and other valuables. Investigators began to suspect Heredisvili even more when they realized he closely resembled a police sketch based on Babis's description of the intruder. The evidence against him was piling up: his history of violent burglaries, his attempt to flee the country, and his likeness to the suspect sketch. Police were confident they had found their man. A wrongful arrest and a failed investigation. Heredisvili was arrested and interrogated for 4 days, during which physical force was allegedly used to extract information. He was repeatedly questioned about how he entered the home, committed the murder, and escaped. However, despite enduring a brutal interrogation that left him concussed, he maintained his innocence, insisting that he had never even heard of Caroline Crouch. Ultimately, the evidence against him fell apart. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, and no concrete link between him and the crime. He was cleared of any involvement, and as a consequence, 3 officers from the Athens homicide squad were demoted for their failure. With the case still unsolved, investigators turned their attention to a local Albanian organized crime group. Initially, they compiled a list of 100 suspects, which was later narrowed down to 10 individuals who were on the red list of known criminals. Mugshots of these suspects were shown to Babis, but no further details were disclosed. As time passed, public frustration grew. Crime rates in Athens were rising, racial tensions were increasing, and the lack of progress in Caroline's case only fueled anxiety. Even a large monetary reward for information remained unclaimed. Experts commenting on the case noted that if this had been a typical home invasion, it would have been solved by now. A stunning breakthrough. Despite the delays, Caroline's family remained hopeful that justice would prevail. Babies frequently spoke to the media, supporting police efforts and sharing his grief on social media to keep the case in the public eye. Then, on June 17th, 37 days after Caroline was murdered, a breakthrough occurred. During a small memorial service on the island of Alonisos, detectives discreetly approached Babis, requesting that he accompany them to Athens. They explained that they had uncovered new evidence and needed his help in identifying a suspect. Unaware of what lay ahead, Babis agreed. By this time, investigators had examined every detail of the night Caroline was killed. Several inconsistencies in Babis's account had emerged, particularly regarding how the supposed intruders had entered the home. He had stated that they broke in through the basement window, but investigators discovered that the window was too small for a person of the described build to fit through. This revelation was just the beginning of what would become one of the most shocking twists in the case. The cracks in Babis's story. Babis had initially described how intruders broke into the house, but further investigation revealed that his version of events was impossible. He claimed the intruders had entered through a basement window, but the window was far too small for anyone to fit through. He also told the police that the house had been ransacked by the intruders. However, neighbors reported hearing no signs of a struggle, only the distress cries of the couple's puppy that night. There were no sounds of a house being trashed, no calls for help, and no crying infant. Furthermore, investigators found no fingerprints or DNA inside the home. Another major inconsistency in Babis's account was the claim that the intruders had removed the memory card from the living room security camera. Data from the camera revealed that the card was removed at 1:20 a.m., several hours before the alleged break-in. Additionally, Caroline had been wearing a smartwatch that monitored her heart rate. At 3:58 a.m., her pulse readings indicated she was asleep. However, by 4:05 a.m., her heart rate had spiked by 50%, signaling intense physical and emotional stress. By 4:11 a.m., her heart had stopped, contradicting Babis's timeline of when the murder occurred. Babis's own fitness tracker also raised suspicions. Data from his smartphone app revealed that he was moving around during the time he claimed to have been tied up. When police attempted to replicate his alleged emergency call while bound, they found it was nearly impossible. Further investigations uncovered that Caroline had attempted to book a hotel for herself and her daughter on the night she was killed. A text message sent to a friend revealed she had been threatening to leave Babis. A love story that turned into a nightmare. Babis and Caroline's relationship had once seemed like a fairy tale. They met when Babis was on holiday in Alonisos, where his mother, a teacher, lived. He was charismatic, financially well off, and passionate about photography. He even caught Caroline's attention by flying a helicopter over her school, something many teenage girls would have considered a dream. Caroline believed they were a perfect match. She confided in her family that she was happy, and a year and a half into their relationship, Babis proposed. At the time of the proposal, Caroline was still underage, but she turned 18 just 3 days later. They soon married and moved to Glika Nera. In the early years of their marriage, Caroline attended college in Athens while Babis worked as a pilot. They maintained an active presence on social media, portraying an image of a happy and loving relationship. However, Caroline's private diary told a much darker story. The truth hidden in Caroline's diary. In her diary, Caroline frequently questioned her relationship with Babis. In 2019, she wrote about intense arguments with him and her growing doubts. She mentioned planning to leave and stay with her sister, uncertain if she could continue in the relationship. Over time, Babis became increasingly manipulative and controlling. The signs had been present since their wedding. Rather than having a traditional Greek celebration with family and friends, Babis convinced Caroline to elope. What may have seemed like a romantic gesture was, in reality, an early attempt to isolate her. After they moved in together, the control deepened. Babis was the sole provider, while Caroline, a university student, had little financial independence. Her mother, Susan, occasionally sent her money, but Babis took control of those funds as well. One heartbreaking diary entry read, "I love babies so much that I can't leave him, even though this relationship hurts me." In another entry, Caroline recounted a tearful confrontation with Babis. She wanted to leave but felt trapped because she was pregnant. She wrote, "I stayed with him so my daughter would not grow up without both parents." On July 2020, exactly 1 month after giving birth, she wrote, "Today, my little one is a month old. It's also the day I told babies I want to leave. I feel awful." Her diary also mentioned a house in Athens, located in Halandri, possibly hinting at a future escape plan. What had started as a dream for Caroline had slowly turned into a nightmare, one filled with pain, fear, and isolation. She was trapped in an abyss she could not escape, one that would eventually consume her. The final clues. On the night of her murder, Caroline's phone records revealed a series of combative text messages exchanged between her and Babis while they were in the same house. These messages further exposed the deep fractures in their marriage. With mounting evidence, investigators finally confronted Babis. They told him he was now the prime suspect in Caroline's murder. Then, they showed him the overwhelming proof against him. The confession, a web of lies. With overwhelming and irrefutable evidence exposing the inconsistencies in his initial statements, Babis was interrogated for 8 hours. Eventually, he broke down. However, his confession was not one of truth. It was a carefully crafted fabrication. Babis claimed that on the night of May 10th, the couple had begun arguing, supposedly only about their daughter. He said Caroline was determined to take the child and leave, which made him lose control, as he considered his daughter his entire world. He then alleged that Caroline had violently thrown their infant into the cot and demanded that he leave the house. According to him, she was the one who became physically aggressive, pushing and punching him. He insisted that, in the heat of the moment, his judgment became clouded. From that point, his actions turned monstrous. Babis admitted that he lashed out, strangled Caroline, and then pressed a pillow over her face, using his full body weight to suffocate her. He murdered her in cold blood, right in front of their 11-month-old child. After realizing what he had done, he briefly considered disposing of Caroline's body, but knew it would not be possible. Instead, he decided to frame someone else. He staged a home invasion, even going so far as to kill their dog, Roxy, to make the scene more convincing. He then placed his own child next to Caroline's lifeless body before tying himself up with rope and duct tape to complete the illusion. Babis told investigators that he deserved to be punished and owed an apology to everyone he had hurt. Yet, even in his confession, he tried to shift blame onto Caroline, claiming that she had driven him to become unstable and aggressive. The tragic reality, however, was that their only child, the one he claimed to love so much, would now grow up without a mother. She would never know the woman who had once loved her, all because she had been brutally murdered by the man she trusted. The murder that fooled the world. For weeks, Babis had played the grieving widower, fooling not only the public but also Caroline's own family. He had become so confident in his deception that he did not even bother to destroy key evidence. However, the truth eventually caught up with him. In May 2022, he was charged and found guilty of premeditated murder, obstruction of justice, lying to authorities, and animal abuse. What was once seen as a tragic home invasion had unraveled into something far more sinister, one of the most shocking cases of deception and betrayal.